Hello, everybody. A warm welcome to Wisdom from North, the place where we're diving into the deeper meaning of life and asking the big questions. My name is Jannike, and today I'm here with wonderful Teal Swan again, and we will be speaking about her new book, The Completion Process, the practice of getting yourself back together again. And I will also ask Teal some questions that I am curious about. Now, for those of you who don't know Teal, she is one of the leading spiritual teachers in the world. She's the author of The Sculpture in the Sky and Shadows Before Dawn, which I have here in Norwegian actually. And
Ooh,
yeah, and she has a great YouTube channel where she answers questions from viewers every week. And she's doing synchronization workshops all around the world where she brings people up on stage and helps them with their issues through her extrasensory abilities that she has been born with. Now, I recommend to check out our previous interviews where we spoke about the law of attraction and soulmate relationships. But first, hello, Teal. How are you? Welcome back on my show.
that was a good introduction. I feel like a very busy person now.
Well, I mean, you are. To be honest, I'm incredibly impressed about how much you're doing because I feel like you just came out with this book and then now you're coming out with a new book and you're doing synchronization workshops and you just got married as well. So congratulations. And you're giving out videos every week. So, I mean, it's really amazing. You must have a lot of energy.
Yeah, must be.
So let's dive into your new book.
All right.
Because from what I understand, this was about self-love, you accepting yourself and really learning how to love yourself. And that the new book is more about diving into the shadows in ourselves. So tell us about like your intention with the book and what you wanted to do to people, how it can help people.
So I've been using a process myself, facilitating other people for a lot of years now. It's a process that I created over the years, trying to recover from all the abuse that I went through in my own childhood. So with my extrasensory abilities, I'm able to do a lot of soul retrieval. On top of that, I have a very vast understanding of post-traumatic stress disorder. And so what I've done is basically created a process which masters pretty much every modality that people have had over the last 2,000 years for overcoming issues that you may face. Now, it's easy to think that trauma is like limited to people who've been to war or things like that, but trauma is a very wide spectrum. I say it's a spectrum because on this side you've got the trauma of, say, being weaned. Pretty much everybody was weaned in a way that wasn't really beneficial to them in this day and age, and that's a trauma. It's something that emotionally we struggle with and can't really move beyond, so it creates a bit of a catch where a portion of us is still stuck there. For example, a lot of abundance issues that people have in their adult life links back to trauma around nursing. So on this spectrum, you've got that, and on this other side of the spectrum, you've got people like me who went through years upon years of trauma and who suffer from complex post-traumatic stress disorder. Or you've got return vets from war, or people, civilians who were in war-torn areas, things like that, or people who were in car wrecks and lost relatives in it. Basically, when we're talking about trauma, we're talking about anything that we can't really get past. So going through that experience has made it so that our future life trajectory went a certain way. So if I experience trauma in a relationship, I'm having trouble in my future relationships. Anytime there is that A causes B type of situation, we need to go back and revisit the trauma in a way that we can find resolution. So I've been using this process for years with people, facilitating it myself. And somebody suggested to me once that I just turn it into a process that other people can use. And I had a real existential crisis. Because basically, well, it's a long story, but with trauma, the reason that people don't resolve trauma a lot of times is because it's so difficult for us to deal with it emotionally that we dissociate in the moment of trauma. And it's that dissociative process that in fact causes post-traumatic stress disorder, and to a lesser degree, causes people to see those negative effects in the future, right?
What do you mean by dissociate?
To dissociate is to basically experience a disreality where, like, in the it's what people experience sometimes when they're doing a full-on out-of-body experience, where let's say that they get in a high-speed car crash and suddenly their perspective is that they're watching their own body tumble through the air. So that would be the farthest degree of dissociation in any experience. But dissociation is like shades of gray. So like a girl who's being sexually abused when she's younger oftentimes will remove herself mentally from the experience. And so even though she feels vague sensations, the emotional experience isn't there. And maybe when she's going through it, it was so traumatic that she escaped into a fantasy of, say, hiding inside of a snow globe that was on the desk next to the bed. So there's all these shades of gray of dissociation, but dissociation occurs when we feel inequipped to experience fully with our full consciousness the totality of an experience. And it's a good thing in the moment because it enables you to not completely go straight to hell, let's say when you go through a traumatic experience. However, it creates a split in consciousness. So if you think of your consciousness as a stream, at the moment of trauma, you can imagine another stream breaking off of the main stream and going sideways. And oftentimes that side stream doesn't come back to the main river. So you can think about how much less consciousness, or if we're using the stream analogy, how much less water is available to the main stream when that splitting off has happened. And this is what causes post-traumatic stress, because a portion of you gets frozen at the moment it occurs. This is what a flashback is really about. And when we're talking about emotional triggers, you're getting an emotional flashback. It's memory, but it's the emotional aspect of the memory. So that flashback is basically being triggered, letting you know that there's an aspect of yourself that is stuck at that moment of trauma that has not been able to come forward and find resolution so as to join your adult self.
But in one way you said it was freeze, like something happened with me when I was 3 years old, so that part froze, but you also said that it kind of goes away, that the stream went away. I'm curious about that. Like, does it disappear, or, I mean, where does it go?
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's a really good question. In the moment of trauma, you will find multiple fragments of self, which is part of what makes soul retrieval work so incredibly fun / difficult, because let's just use the concept of a little girl who is molested. Let's say a little girl's laying in bed and she's molested by her dad. In that moment of trauma, it can be so traumatizing that it's not just one split that happens within the self. It's many. So you'll see one split that gets frozen at the moment of trauma and literally is stuck there. You'll see another split that's maybe meeting its need by going into a fantasy reality where she's Pocahontas. You'll see another aspect trying to hide somewhere in the room. Very common for an aspect of soul to hide inside the perpetrator himself or herself.
Okay.
And so it's this fracturing that happens. And when we're doing this kind of retrieval work, we bring those fractured aspects of self back. And for somebody who's doing this work, it will be highly visual. It'll be like a visualization and a sensation. For someone like me, who's an extrasensory, I'm actually observing these aspects coming back. So as a person does this process, their emotional body will look as if it has these holes, right? Kind of like somebody took a cookie cutter and just cut these aspects out of the aura.
Right, in the aura, so you see like holes. Okay, yeah.
What was the most interesting thing for me when I was doing my out-of-body work years ago is when I started going into these holes within the aura, I in fact found out that they were like vortexes or wormholes.
Oh.
So instead of being like a genuine hole where you go through the hole and you're just on the other side of the person, if you go into them, you get sucked back into where that aspect of the soul stream is stuck.
Wow.
Yeah, super awesome. So long story short, before we go on with the process itself, I went into an existential crisis about whether to actually release this to the public.
Okay.
Because of the fact that dissociation, which is what causes this fracturing that ultimately causes the issue of trauma, happens when you can't emotionally deal with an experience. There is a very high likelihood that if somebody goes into that experience again, which is absolutely necessary for healing, that they can't deal with it again in adult life. And so I've essentially, by virtue of exposing this process to the world, put people in a crisis. And so there's a lot of therapists in the field that believe that trauma work, memory work, should never be done outside the context of therapy. But the reality is while some people in the world may be fortunate enough to live in countries where that is an option for people, it's not the case in my country and many other countries in the world, where therapy is quite literally a luxury. And when you're looking at low income, and when you're looking at, let's say, the demographics of people who absolutely need this kind of process the most, they are the people who have the least amount of finance to pay for it. So my crisis was, do I take a very powerful tool and put it in the hands of people regardless the risk, because it's very important to me to have somebody be able to have that tool versus be told it's too powerful of a tool, I'm sorry, you don't have the money for it. Or whether I'm going to withhold that from the mainstream and distrust people and be like, sorry, it's too risky for me, don't want to defend my own process, don't want to risk people going through things that they can't handle because they have no support network. And it was something that I struggled with. It was something that I talked to several other spiritual teachers about. One of my closest friends in this life is Eckhart Tolle, and he ultimately ended up, let's say, pushing me over the edge by saying, I really feel like the world needs this. I feel like the world is ready, and I feel like you should do it. So
I just want to comment on that, because I think it's very important, because I can identify with that, oh, I wish, I had a therapist or a coach, like I need to deal with this stuff. But then I'm like, no, I can't spend money on that. I should spend money on other things. And then I just end up not working with it. And so people need tools. And that's why I love the internet and YouTube and free videos, so everybody can see this, because there can't be just one solution, like with the therapist in the therapist room. There's got to be other ways to deal with stuff in yourself. So I just want to say that. Very glad I did it.
Thank you. We'll see how it goes over in the future. I've been training facilitators, meaning training people to do what I do, which is to lead people through the process, just in case people feel like they really need that support. And also, setting up this huge base of people that I have with what we're calling Teal Tribe, which is this big base of, it's basically, it's like a social media version of an intentional community, and very large. Part of the reason I set that up is so that people could have support. But besides that, it's the only safety net that I've really put there for this process. So I'm about to put in people's hands the tool for resolving trauma, but it means revisiting the trauma you went through, which is not so fun, as I can testify.
So can we go through the process a little bit? Like, how do you know where to start? Like, you have all these issues. Where should I start? People, or I can only speak about myself. Sometimes I feel like, oh, there's so many things that I need to work with. What is the most important thing? How can I know what the core is,
Well, the good news is you don't even have to think about it.
Okay.
What I designed this process so you don't have to know anything about what you were traumatized by. Nothing at all. Because what this has been like in mainstream, shall we say, is that triggers, you understand the concept of triggers, or should I go into that?
Yes.
Okay, so an emotional trigger is an emotional flashback. And the way that we've been dealing with traumatized people over the last, let's say, centuries, is that we're trying to decrease triggers. So let's just go with somebody who's come back from war. It's pretty common, if there are fireworks going off, that somebody who is in a situation in war where they were in direct combat and got into a shootout situation, when you see those, let's say, entertainment pieces going off in the air, their brain is not telling them this is for entertainment. They're saying, okay, I'm back in hell. And then they may dive underneath tables, and like they're back there emotionally in that space of being traumatized. Standard practice is to try to decrease the trigger, meaning we try to get it so they don't feel that way. And what I'm about to say is that we should be doing the opposite. We're getting the flashbacks emotionally and mentally, because that is you trying to call your consciousness back to the event so you can find some resolution there. So you don't need to know anything about what you suffered from or about the priority. All you need to pay attention to is your triggers. And when you get a strong emotional trigger, that is your "it's time now" message for you to then engage with the process. And so instead of thinking about it in terms of you leading this process, meaning I'm going to lead it and I'm going to go back to this time, you kind of take a back seat to your body and say, I'm just going to let my being tell me what needs integration according to what is manifesting externally as this triggering situation.
Right. Okay. So then you get a trigger and you ask yourself, what is this about? And you let your subconsciousness, in a way, come up with a memory?
In a roundabout way, but there are several steps to it.
Okay.
There are 18 steps, I think. That's what we ended up with, 18 individual steps to this completion process. But the first thing you do is you sink into the trigger. So most people, in conjunction with what they've been taught by society, when they start feeling really crappy, they try to do something to feel better. What I lead people to do is the exact opposite. You develop an intense level of conscious presence with that negative trigger. And so people are sinking into it, sitting with it, really feeling it, letting themselves experience it. And you can think of that as intensifying the vibration. We're getting it very, very strong. So after a while, you're asking this sensation the question, when was the first time I felt this exact same way? And so instead of like mentally trying to figure it out, you let it come to the surface. So the emotional trigger is essentially acting like a rope that you're going to climb backwards through time with to the original thing that's popping up. So for example, if in the present moment I'm feeling like this intense implosion, maybe I ask that question and I suddenly have an image of me being in a crib. Now these memories are going to be more or less, let's say, put together. A lot of times with extreme trauma, there's fragmenting of the memory itself. That's how the brain stores trauma. It stores the images separate from the emotions, separate from the sounds, and so it'll feel kind of piecemeal to begin with. But you're basically, the process allows you to just work with whatever is coming up so that you can find integration and resolution with that memory. So at a certain point, after you've intentionally relived the experience, which is, by the way, the #1 argument I'm going to be having over the next year, because there's a huge argument within the psychological community about the concept of re-traumatization through re-experiencing memory versus those of us in my camp, which is it's literally the only way to heal. Now, I can explain to people exactly why it's the only way to heal, but people will be re-experiencing what they went through. So for example, if you were a 4-year-old getting raped, you're reliving your rape, but this time with the conscious intention to do it. You're saying, I'm willing this time, instead of dissociating, I'm willing this time to intentionally experience this and then to find resolution with it. So eventually that memory, once it's been re-experienced, becomes switched into an active visualization. So you're allowing your mind and your being to find a resolution within the context of the memory. So for example, the 4-year-old may be able to be defended. So at a certain point, you bring in the adult self, and the adult self, say, throws off the perpetrator and like does away with him, so that we're moving the child's self, or that stuck aspect of self, through the visualization of the child into a space of safety. And so we're essentially taking what's unresolved and we're creating the opposite experience. And this is self-referencing, is what we call this in the psychology community. It's basically like, if you're not feeling safe, let's create something that feels like safety so that I can have that experience. And by doing that on a spiritual level, you're actually creating the expansion for the person. So post-traumatic stress disorder, and everyone has it, by the way, to a certain degree. That's why you react the way you do. You know, when we get diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder is just when it interferes with our life to the degree that we can no longer function. But there's not a person on earth that does not have post-traumatic stress disorder.
Okay.
Okay. So basically, post-traumatic stress disorder is all about, I couldn't find the expansion through this experience. And so it provides you that experience. This is what the expansion is. So you step into it, and then that fractured aspect of soul rejoins with the current self, and you can then move forward with it. what is frightening is watching how your current life alters as a result of it. Because what we have to understand is you can go back in time mentally and emotionally. The only thing you need an actual time machine for is to go back physically. So when
So
you're
saying
doing
that you're actually going back in time in a way?
yes. Oh, that is exactly what I'm saying. And the major issue with that is if you go back in time and you alter the emotional and the mental causation, you are altering your life mentally and emotionally in the current moment.
Like,
And
are you changing the timeline in a way as well?
Well, time is, let's say, a dimension that is subject to a lot of physical laws.
Okay.
So what it is that you're altering the mental and the emotional, let's say, timeline for the sake of mental understanding. The emotional and mental timeline you are altering the causation of. And this is, it's both the most promising and the most frightening aspect of this process. Because, like, for example, I'll be working with somebody, this is a true story. I was working with somebody who's a chain smoker. I'm talking 12 packs a day. And we went back, basically, the trigger is when I want to smoke. So we were starting to work with that. Instead of smoking, I was taking her back to that feeling of emptiness and needing to take something in. And it was actually when her mother put her on a diet when she was very young, took her to a doctor. Doctor said, we need her to lose some weight. She's off the chart. And so they put her on a diet, and she had that feeling of starvation. So that later in life, she learned to cover up that feeling of starvation, which was unresolved with the cigarettes. Anyway, we resolved the let's say, emotional component, that memory. We found resolution with it. The very next day, and there is no explanation for this on a scientific level, because what do we know? We know that your cells get addicted to nicotine, right? That's what the story we've been told forever. Next day, she has a smoke break. She doesn't go. Didn't even realize she didn't go until after it was already passed, and then was like, what the hell? Huh. I actually don't have a desire. Like, the craving doesn't even exist.
Wow.
Which is, more and more proof of the fact that a lot of the symptoms we're seeing in our adult life are in fact just a symptom of a causation which we can alter. So the scariest aspect of this is that when you do this kind of work, you come back a completely different person on an emotional and mental level. And I have seen people's lives literally overnight as a result of doing this process, like completely unravel and have to shift into something else because of it. So it's like if you resolve this thing back in your childhood that's leading you to this abusive relationship, the marriage is then ending that fast. You will come out of it, and it's like either you're okay with what's happening in the present moment, or you're not okay with it and it has to change. So it is like, hold on to your seats for everything to shift, ultimately in a better direction. But you know what it's like to be in that uncertainty where it's like everything's changing.
And you probably attract different things as well because you have changed your frequency and your energy.
Yes. Yeah. Like overnight attracting different stuff.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Exciting. Yeah. I thought about that. This reminds me a little bit about shamanic work. And I feel like sometimes, in spirituality, there's so many names and different schools and ways. And then I was like, but isn't this shamanism, or isn't this, where you are retrieving soul parts? Would you say that that's similar? Or?
Ultimately, I love this because, like, everybody wants to put things into a certain camp, but the reality is like, if there's a universal truth out there, pretty much every different modality is going to trip upon it somehow, So what's happening is that these groups that would call themselves shamanic groups, by virtue of becoming more aware universally and the natural process of spiritual awakening, they've tripped on this concept that souls can fragment, that you can go back and retrieve them, that traveling through time is not limited to the physical dimension in a time machine. And so for years, a lot of different people and tribes around the world have been practicing shamanic soul retrieval. And each one seems to have a different variation for how they do it. Oftentimes with shamanic soul retrieval, it is somebody who is in the position where I am, somebody who's able to do interdimensional travel that is retrieving those aspects of self for a person. my real goal doing this was to try to create a way that people could do it for themselves. That was my ultimate goal. I don't want anybody to be dependent on a healer or anything to be able to retrieve these aspects of self.
Right.
So in creating the process the exact way that I did it, and I did it a very specific way for very specific reasons, I wanted to basically say, this is how you can do it in your own life with your triggers, regardless of whether anybody's there or not. So it's like putting a huge, like, magic wand, so to speak, in somebody else's hands.
But that's awesome, because I feel like before it was all about the gurus and the teacher up there, and we were like, okay, that's what I should do. And now it's the empowerment. We can do it ourselves. We don't need so many external things. We can do it. I love that.
Mm-hmm.
But so where where are we going with this? Like, what's the goal? Or I mean, you can't say goal, but if you is the goal to become like I'll just let you put that in.
Is the goal what?
Yeah, is the goal in a way to be whole, and what does it mean to become whole? I mean, I'm just wondering how I would feel if I was whole. Like, what would that be like?
For the sake of people's understanding, we have to put it that way, that the ultimate goal is to become whole and to become enlightened. But what you find when you progress in the direction of finding wholeness, or in the direction of finding enlightenment, is that the path of spirituality kind of folds you back in on yourself, and you realize that even the quest for those things sends yourself a message that you're not actually in a state of wholeness as you are. And so it becomes much more about what we call unconditional presence. It becomes about how am I whole as I am? How was I never fractured? And like, this is the frustrating part for people to conceptualize of when it comes to spiritual progression, is because it'll turn you in loop-de-loops. There is no straight line when it comes to spiritual practice. What's true today is going to be invalidated tomorrow, and you got to have the flexibility to allow that to happen. But in answer to your question, the ultimate goal seems to be unconditionally present with yourself regardless of how you are. And by virtue of doing that, you are in a state of awakening. By virtue of doing that, you are not experiencing extreme negative emotions. And when you do experience emotions, which you will experience them as a flavor. You won't add any meaning to it. And so your experience of them will be quite different. So right now, for example, it's the experiencing of grief and what I'm telling myself that means for me in my life that's actually causing me the amount of suffering that I'm experiencing right now. But I can experience grief without having grief mean suffering. So that is what changes as you progress through this process.
So that you accept that the feeling is there. You're not, in a way, you can label it, but you're not resisting it or judging it. You're just aware that it's there and letting it be there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And one of the things I love so much about this process is inevitably it's going to lead all people to this one, let's say, fractured aspect of self. And it's the fractured aspect of self that originates from when we started to be socialized. The process of socialization teaches us that certain things are acceptable and certain things are not acceptable about us, especially emotions. So we'll find actually that we get a little bit stuck with the completion process at a certain point.
Okay.
And we start feeling like, I can't resolve it. I can't resolve it. I can't find resolution. And it's because you're running into an aspect of self, which is essentially a child self, that's sitting here with its arm folded saying, stop telling me that I have to be different than what I am right now. And like, as long as you are coming at me, wanting to heal me, like there's something freaking wrong about me, I'm not going to do anything for you. So it's that original trauma that we start to run into. And I love when people hit that point. It's like, most people are like, I feel like I'm failing with it. And that's my indication. It's like, hell yes. Because it means you run into that aspect of self where you are genuinely knocking on the door of self-acceptance.
Is that the healing trap that you were talking about in the video recently?
Yeah.
In a way?
Yes. Yep.
So I'm curious about something else. Maybe it's actually the same, but Spirituality 1.0. I don't know if you made a video about it or where I got it from, but some told me that they're like, in one way, yeah, we see, okay. Okay, I might get this wrong, but that the first step, like when you start on the spiritual path, you're like thinking positively, because you're aware that you're creating your reality. So, wow, I gotta think positively. I gotta observe my thoughts. But then all of a sudden, all these awful thoughts comes up, and you feel horrible one day, and then you're like, no, I shouldn't feel horrible. And then on the other side, you have the shadow work, where you dive deep into the darkness inside of you, and you trying to embrace everything that's dark in you. And I wonder about if there's a step here that you start being positive and then moving on when you're more ready to the darkness, or if it's two different teachings in a way, or schools.
I have seen it as a progression.
Okay.
So people are like a two-sided coin. On one side we have the consciousness, on the other side we have the unconsciousness. And so these two modalities work with either side of the coin. Ultimately, what I'm calling spirituality 3.0 is the integration of both. So instead of saying that it's two different teachings, I would say that it is a progression. So most people start with the light side. They start with what they're conscious of. They start by being super excited about the fact that they have any hand in creating their own reality. And now it's all about that, what I can do to create my own reality. But it's still largely an unconscious process because they are not aware of the totality of themselves and what we call the unconscious suppressed aspects of self. So what will happen is you'll run into that kind of catch where, okay, I don't understand why this isn't working. I've been focusing on positive stuff and I've been trying to intentionally create, and yet I'm still lining up with these experiences. Why is that? That's the indication that you're ready to then become conscious. So you take the light of consciousness down into the shadow aspect, and you're basically beginning to take the light into the shadow. And what will naturally evolve out of that process is, and I say naturally because you cannot force it, is this really beautiful space where you are intentionally creating, but not because you're trying to avoid anything. So most movement in the universe and expansion has happened going towards something in order to get away from something. But by doing shadow work, which is that spirituality 2.0 processes, you are no longer trying to avoid it. And so your desires are not the byproduct of aversion. And so suffering is not a dynamic you experience anymore. Emotion is, however.
So you don't.
But I mean, it's.
Sorry, you don't attract more darkness by going into the shadows, because it can be pretty dark. Like when we think about the law of attraction.
Well, the thing is that what we have to understand about the shadow is that it's always there and it always has existed. So like we love to lie to ourselves. I did a whole video on this, by the way, for anybody who wants to watch it. I think it's called In Defense of Shadow Work, because of that main argument that when you focus on the shadow, you get more shadow. And it's been the #1 way that Law of Attraction 1.0 people basically will tell you, don't go to 2.0 because this is what happens. But what they're not understanding is that the subconscious mind is focusing on these things all day, every day, regardless of whether they're aware of it or not.
It's just there, like underneath. Yeah.
Yeah. So what we have to get about the way the human mind functions is that it's an efficiency tool. So like, I mean, do you do a sport?
Yeah, jogging and cross-country skiing and tennis.
Okay, let's do cross-country skiing.
Yeah.
Do you remember learning to cross-country ski or no?
Sorry?
Oh my God, I just realized how Norwegian you are just this moment. Yeah. I cross-country ski.
Yeah, we all do.
Oh. Okay, so do you remember learning or no?
No, I was very little.
Good for you. Do you remember, have you ever watched a kid learn?
Yeah.
You know how much focus it takes them to figure out how to move those
Yes,
things?
yes. They start without the, what is it called? The
poles.
Yeah.
Poles.
Yeah. They start without it to get the balance.
So the mind has to focus intently on something that it hasn't done before. But the mind is an efficiency tool in that it is designed to recognize patterns. And so once it recognizes a pattern, say in muscle fibers, it will convert that muscle fiber reaction to muscle memory. then it takes you absolutely nothing to do it. So here you are sitting in front of me, and as an adult, if I put cross-country skis under your feet, you wouldn't have any issue with it. You wouldn't be thinking about how to do it. In fact, we could hold a conversation while we skied.
Yeah.
So what we have to get is that the mind does this with everything, not just muscle fiber movements. It does this with thoughts. It does this with beliefs. And so in the time period that it takes you to consciously focus on one thought, such as, I like life, your brain can rattle off 10 thoughts that have a much more intensity because you've been thinking them more often, such as, I actually hate life, this is all pointless. And so we have, and that aspect of ourselves is a point of attraction. And it is much larger usually than the conscious aspect of self. And so even though we could think all day long, I really like my life, why are we lining up with all these experiences that make us really hate life? It's because it's a match to those things that are happening so quickly within our psyche that we aren't even aware of them. So this is why, and your brain is doing that. So long story short, when you become aware of something, it's different than thinking it. So this is a big thing to understand too, if you're a kind of person who's nervous to do shadow work because of the fact that you're scared you're going to attract it. When you're in the thought saying, okay, I really hate life, it is very different than stepping back and looking at the thought.
Right.
I really hate life. Yeah. Like you are in two different places of attraction.
That's like Buddhist teaching as well.
Yeah, so we call this disidentification. When you step back and disidentify enough to look at or become aware of the thought you're thinking, you pull momentum out of the point of attraction of that thing. So by becoming aware of the shadows, you are in fact pulling all of your point of attraction momentum out of that shadow, and it will stop manifesting.
Awesome. So
the way to think about this mentally is, I think the best way to think about it is, it works a lot like going down into a dark basement with a flashlight. You can't argue that if you bring light down into the basement, by virtue of looking at it, it gets darker. That's not how it works. Bringing light into a dark space creates light space. It creates that consciousness.
So on those lines, I really have an important question for me. Like I've been really thinking about that the past half year. It's about darkness and the devil and evil, and I really would like to hear your perspective on it. I'm wondering about some thoughts, maybe sometimes, if they are mine or if they're coming from the outside, if they're really ugly, or and if there is an external or how can I say it, if there is a devil that is its own being, or if it's just part of the whole, like if everything is light and love, that's all there is, and like the devil is just part of that, or if he's like a complete different entity and being. Yeah.
The devil is as different of a being as your own thought form is. So the reality is, yes, the devil is a thought form in collective reality. And the issue that I've got essentially is that because of how many minds are feeding that thought form, it can then have that much of an effect. Like anytime you feed anything energy, it becomes more and more manifested through the various dimensions. And then, yes, absolutely, if you are a vibrational match to that entity, you can line up with it.
So there is an entity that is the devil?
Yes.
Okay, so where is that entity? Is it in the whole universe? Is it in all the universes, or is it just here on planet
You're
Earth?
looking at the 6th and 7th dimension to look for that particular being. But that being can manifest itself through the lower dimensions, even into the 3rd dimension, if it's a match, say, to somebody who is in a space of enough believing about that entity. So, so like, for example, here in America, I see a lot of this being appearing or becoming poltergeistic in areas of the Midwest because of the particular breed of religious beliefs that happen in that area of this country.
But why is it in such a high dimension? I mean, I thought these dimensions were lighter, lighter frequency.
That's well, oh my God, this is the major. I know this is so complicated.
Yeah,
I can explain this in the way that's easy for the mind to comprehend. But in general, you will experience emotionally, as the frequency goes up and up, more positive emotion. But if we're going to take a real objective view of the dimensions, we're looking at reality constructs, not necessarily better or worse or positive or negative. So we're using a ladder to kind of describe a lot of things in the universe, which we then apply to other descriptions. But it is possible for very negative entities to exist in a sixth and seventh dimension, very low frequency beings, even though they are vibrating at the frequency of the sixth dimension. So what we have to understand about dimensions is they govern laws. For example, in the third dimension, one of the laws is we're on a linear timeline. Once you get to the fifth dimension, you're no longer on a linear timeline. You have access to all potential timelines branching off of one, let's say, one incarnation. So I can have access to myself at 5 years old and have access to all the different potentials that happened if my mom died versus lived. That's what we start to trip into at the fifth dimension. So the reason I'm explaining that to you is it's a way of understanding that in these other dimensions, we have access to different universal laws. And it's like a different reality than it is here in the 3D. But it's not necessarily that the higher you go in the universe in terms of dimensions, the more lovely beings will be. You know?
Wow, that was completely new for me. Okay, so is this something to worry about in a way? I mean, I understand that we shouldn't worry because that makes it worse. But okay, so how can we deal with it? Do you have any advice how to for instance, when we die, people can be afraid. I mean, since that devil is there, one might meet him.
Are we getting close to home? No. Okay. Well, ultimately, a thought form, we need to stop thinking of a thought form as an individual being or person and more as something that we are collectively co-creating.
Okay, an energy in a way.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah? Yeah.
But I mean, at that level, you are energy also. But it will help you for, let's say, for your own ability to not run into this particular being, to realize that it's a collective art project. Okay. That when you feed enough energy into it, begins to become animated and become its own thinker. So a person is a thought that thinks. Thought forms ultimately are a thought that thinks as well. And the thought form is essentially the point where the devil is. So if we pull our collective focus out of it and place our collective focus somewhere else, that is the collective art piece we are creating.
Right.
And I mean, if we've got tools like, say, the completion process, the one that I've just offered to people, we have the capacity to shift our own frequency to a degree that we're not a match to that. Yeah. You literally are not a vibrational match. And ultimately, if you want to feel safe, which everyone does, all you got to understand about the universe and the way the law of attraction works is it's as simple as the car radio dial, that basically if you're not on the frequency, you're not going to receive the channel. It's that simple.
But I love hearing that, and I made a video about it, about darkness, and I was very unsure whether to put it out, but you're saying basically what I also felt, that there's nothing to worry about it as long as I'm doing my project. Like, I believe in what I believe, and I don't want to worry about that because that's something else. Like, that's not for me in a way. So I would like to speak a little bit about our galactic family, because me personally, I've always felt very attracted to the stars. And I feel like more and more spiritual teachers are speaking about our multidimensional nature. I'm interviewing Matt Kahn on Monday, and I saw you did a conversation with him. That was lovely. I love that conversation. And so he's talking about that too. And can you say a little bit about, for those people who are new to what a multidimensional being is, what that is about, and if this is something that is more opening up now, this information in a way?
It's more, we've always known this, but it's more that the mainstream is getting closer and closer to being ready to see that they are not just physical people made of meat. So we're ready to understand that we are like a layer cake. we exist on each dimension in the universe. And if we can tap into each dimensional aspect of self, we have access to a whole different range of experiences. So, for example, if I have access to my 11th dimensional aspect, I can see this painful situation that I'm in from a perspective of what I intended for the future. Because obviously the 11th dimensional self is not limited by a linear timeline like I am in the 3D. So this is where most psychics have always been, where I can see now what my intention was before I was born. I can see my past lives, how they led me to this decision for this life. And not only that, what I was intended to get out of this experience. So instead of being in the 3D lost as a sort of victim to the experience, I can see, oh my gosh, actually I went into that because I went to get this out of it. Now, I don't want this to be an excuse for like people to spiritually bypass, because honestly, it's like my Achilles heel. I hate spiritual bypassing, and this can be a big way to be like, you know what, I'm not going to go near the pain of what I experienced because I did it for a reason. But the real beautiful aspect, I mean, we have to admit, is the fact that when you get in touch with these multidimensional aspects of selves, you do have access to a range of information about your experience that changes the dynamic of what you experience. That means a lot less suffering.
Does that mean that I am existing, for instance, on another planet or in another system right now? Like I could be on the Pleiades right now?
You could be, yes.
So the beings who are visiting us, they are parts of ourselves then?
Many times, yes.
Right. So in one way, I mean, we're very occupied or talking about the physical UFOs and everything, and other people are speaking about the more dimensional beings that are not physical, and I'm a little bit confused about this, the physicality and the non-physicality. And
I can do it quick. I can literally take you real quick with it. Ready?
Yeah.
The amount of extraterrestrial beings that can visit us on this planet in a third dimensional way is very, very limited. We have to understand that a physical being is restricted for coming here if they come from another, let's say, place in our same galaxy as we are for going to the bottom of the ocean of our own planet. If you take a physical human 10 feet underwater, like they're going to be struggling back to the damn surface. And what we're expecting is that every extraterrestrial can live just like we do on Earth. Hell no. In fact, many of the extraterrestrial beings, if they were to come here in a third dimensional way, could exist for 3.2 seconds in the nitrogen content in your atmosphere without dissolving. So the beings that we're having the majority of our interaction with and have for thousands of years in a spiritual way are not the beings who can coexist with us here on Earth in a third dimensional way, but they have access to higher dimensional experiences. Many of these whole civilizations exist in a multidimensional way, but within the context of our same galaxy. So there are, say in Arcturus, 6-dimensional reality. And so what they are experiencing is anything that you can experience along with the 6th dimension. For example, a group mind, being able to perceive the thoughts of every single being within their society. And so there's no agreeing and no disagreeing because everybody's point or perspective is your perspective. That's just one example of the way that they experience life. But from the 6th dimension, it becomes an option to choose into physical existence. You can choose 3D perspective. So oftentimes what they're doing, if they're not directly using these higher dimensional planes to travel, say move through time, is that they're coexisting with these higher dimensional truths, which is there is no space and time. Like we're more in a quantum field where it's think is. Space and time literally unravels in the higher dimension. It is gone, which is why when I talk about out-of-body travel, I sort of joke that we even call it travel, because there is none. Like, travel is a perception that the 3D mind comes up with to explain what just happened. But so what's happening is you're having all of these things. You have the 3D beings that are visiting the planet. You have beings who are, higher dimensional beings that are using dimensions to travel here, meaning all you need to do to travel through the 4th dimension is to fold the 4th dimension through the 5th dimension, and you get an immediate point. You don't need to take time to go anywhere. And you also have beings where there's no travel taking place whatsoever. That's happening more through channeling and things like that. where the beings are communicating to us down, trickling through the third dimension from the dimensions above. But they do coexist in um, our current universe, the same as we exist here.
Wow. So will there come a time where we will like know this or speak about this in public? Like
Yes.
yes,
Hell yes.
like close time or like in
I
my and your time.
I'm pretty surprised that we've been able to suppress a lot of this information as long as we have, frankly.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I would guess soon. I'm not the kind of I really hate throwing out timelines because the reality about the future is that you've got many potentials that a being is a match to. And so as somebody who sees future timelines, you'd be throwing out a guess, which is always variable. And to the degree that you're conscious, that's the degree of the variability of your future life path potentials. So someone who's not very conscious, I could look at their lifetimes and tell you with extreme accuracy how long things will take for them, because chances are they're not going to change the way that they're thinking. But it's all bets are off once you're dealing with a conscious person, because they're going to become conscious of their shadow aspects and shift them. They're going to become conscious of what they really want and focus on it. And it's a much more interactive relationship they have with the universe. And so it's like looking at their timelines in the future is like watching those boards at the stock market exchange. It's like they're just changing.
You look at it like that?
Yeah.
Wow. That must be pretty cool.
It's really cool, and it's a cool way to tell who's conscious and who's not, because even when people pass me on the streets, I'm watching their life path potentials unfold.
So how conscious am I?
Very.
Oh, good. Okay. It's good to know that my future is not set in stone then.
Oh yeah, there's only a few aspects. There's literally only a few aspects of you left where I could guess with relative accuracy when they're going to occur, because there's a stagnation in them, because there's not been consciousness added to them. But knowing you, you're going to take care of it. So
I hope so. So do you believe in humanity's future? Is it, I mean, I just spoke with Diana Cooper. She spoke about the golden era, and we had this huge discussion because I was like, but how can you think that when I see all the awful things happening? But she really believes in the golden time, that's coming. And people are saying we're going into the fifth dimension. Matt Kahn is saying it, that I know, I'm smiling because I know who's winning. Is that your perspective too, that we're moving towards something positive and good?
ultimately, yeah.
Okay. Okay.
But I mean, I'm always really struggling as a spiritual teacher about the words that I used around this particular subject, because what people need and want so bad is inspiration, and yet I'm the teacher of authenticity.
Right. I see.
So do I choose between the authentic truth, or am I more authentic to the fact that I want people to feel inspired? And that's the crux that I get into. And now that I've said that, I kind of outed myself already. In that you asking me that question today is a little bit like coming back to me when I was 3 years old and asking if I have faith that I'm going to get through everything and have a good life, knowing that what was ahead of me was 13 years of ritual trauma, to ultimately create what you see today, which is me in this state of awesomeness, which is totally worth it. What I'm watching outside this dimension isn't good. It's not good. It's basically a conflict that is so intense that it wakes up the totality of humanity, and the only people who are left are the ones who are conscious. So do I ultimately see the golden age? Hell yeah. Absolutely. Everyone that says that that's what's coming is 100% correct. I do see that, but I see it on the other side of a conflict like we've never seen before.
Conflict from the outside or on Earth, on the planet, like between humans?
Between humans.
Okay. Okay. Well, I guess we got to make a choice then.
Yes, we do need to make a choice. But it's also, the reason that I choose to say this is because it can get very confusing, the level of doom and dread that many people who are conscious are feeling right now, when they simultaneously feel the aspect of themselves that feels like we're headed towards a new Earth. The thing about creation is that destruction often takes place beforehand. And most forces in this universe are in favor of a leveling of the playing field before a new system is built, rather than changing the old. So we're being called basically at this point in time to figure out what it is that we want to create. We have to get really super conscious, really super fast, and it is no longer a luxury. Awakening is not a luxury anymore. It is an absolute necessity, even for survival on this planet,
Wow.
to stay a match to the earth itself. Which is why you're watching people be thrown into such incredible awakening crises right now. It used to be that like you could do awakening slowly. Hell no, not an option anymore. It's literally like a bitch slap from the universe saying, nope, you're going to wake up and fast.
So
and
we're getting help. We're getting help from the
oh
outside.
God, yeah, tons and tons and tons.
Okay, that's good to know.
Tons and tons and tons.
Yeah. Well, wonderful. Wow.
But if you are one of those people who's tapping into the collective, let's say what we're lining up with currently as a human race, don't think you're going crazy, because this is the most unstable that I have ever seen it on planet Earth. And the polarization is intense. You're watching people go as deep into unconsciousness as they possibly can go, and to the opposite extreme, people waking up at a faster rate and a more aggressive rate than ever before. So don't be surprised if you're an intuitive person and an empathic person, if you're just feeling some days like, oh my God, I don't know how to survive this roller coaster. Wow. It's pretty normal for one of these extreme transition phases.
Okay, wow. It's a bit scary to hear, I guess, but well, reality is, I mean, I just experienced, my parents were in Nice when the attack was there, and I just fell apart, and I got so dark, like inside of me. I couldn't stay at work, and the next day I was fine again, but I just lost so much hope right there and then. So I guess in a way we have to be warriors on the light side. I've never actually liked that word because I don't like the word warrior, but some say, you know, call it light workers or light warriors. And in a way you have to really fight for the light then, I guess.
I have the opposite opinion.
Okay.
I feel like we are being called at this point in time to become more conscious and caretaking of the aspects of ourselves that cannot fight for the light than ever before, and that is the real light work. So I would say that at that we're getting the opportunity over and over again to confront aspects of ourselves that are shadow aspects. I mean, we would love to separate ourselves from the man who ran over everyone in Nice, but the reality is he is a projection of the collective unconscious. And so we have to be aware of the aspect within us that not only was the victims and that got run over and that feels like the world is impossible, and no matter what you do, even if you go try to have fun one day, you're going to get slaughtered and your life's never going to be the same. And also the aspect of yourself that sometimes just wants to kill everyone. And that's an aspect of ourselves we don't want to look at. And I really am challenging the spiritual community to become aware of those aspects of self, because it's easy to bypass them. It's easy to say, you know what, we're just light warriors and we're just going to have to focus on that, when the reality is that the aspect of us that really needs our conscious attention, care, and focus are the aspects of ourselves that are so wounded and injured that we actually are either the victim or the perpetrator still. And it is only when we come in and caretake those much darker aspects of self, darker not because they're worse or wrong, darker because they're less conscious, that we're going to see that unconsciousness disappear within the collective reality, and these events will cease to occur. Because it literally, I will tell you, if we do not take care of that aspect of ourselves, we will be a match to a blow up of the collective unconscious of mankind, which is gearing up to a third world war.
Wow.
So in those moments, rather than just pushing for the light, I would have us get super in touch with the aspect of ourselves that is either side of the spectrum in these major attacks that we're going to continue to see.
Yeah, I know you have to go. I just want to finish this thought because that day when I was really feeling low, like I got that anger, you know, and I could just imagine what that does to people if he was standing right in front of me, you know, or that we want to destroy things. Like we get so angry when somebody are taking our loved ones. So and then we just continue that that circle. But you're saying more that I should just have accepted that feeling and loved it and know that he's part of me. And right, I see it now.
You should be there unconditionally for the aspect of yourself that isn't okay with it.
Right.
I mean, in the spiritual community, we have way too much of a tendency to say, you know what, I'm okay with it. It's all in a good place. Like, but no, screw that. Nobody had a good day that day. You know, like we should just be willing to say, this is not good. It doesn't make me happy to watch this. I'm in tune with my anger. I'm in tune with my grief. I'm in tune with the aspect of me that would love to run over people that I don't like. I'm also in tune with the aspect of me that just like can't live through the idea of what those parents had to experience. You know, the real sheer pain of that is what needs our unconditional presence. And it is through that understanding that we will not become the perpetrator again. And that is what will create the new earth. But like, and this is the reason that we're gearing up for what we're gearing up for in preparation for the new earth, is that basically most people are not at a point where they're that conscious yet. And so they will continue to perpetrate as a result of being perpetrated against, which is the cycle we've been caught in for thousands of years, until literally the experience is so extreme that they can't do it anymore. And that's always been the benefit of suffering. Suffering is a huge wake-up call. I have not met a person who has reached awakening without experiencing suffering. It seems to be the doorway most of us walk through. So as a result of that, people will be done with conflict, and they will be more aware of how to take care of the aspects of self that are deemed unacceptable, as opposed to continue to make them unacceptable.
Yeah, I mean, it feels so right, because it's something about everything we're brought up to believe that it's wrong when I do this and I shouldn't do that, and all the shoulds, and then we never questioned it. And that's why I mean, I've been doing interviews for 4 years and been reading all kinds of books, but still I fall back to all these feelings and I judge them, and I'm like, what's the answer? And so
here's the key. You ready for the key?
Yeah.
The aspect of you that needs your conscious presence and care and attention is the part that judges.
Right.
We don't need to make that aspect wrong. See, like even in the discourse, you made it wrong.
Right.
Instead, be like, okay, I'd like to understand what judgment does. I would like to understand why judging makes you feel safe. I want to understand the emotions behind it. And I'm going to be here for the aspect of you that's scared and is judging because of it. It's a totally different attitude. And this is in fact when humanity and divinity begin to merge, because divinity comes in and starts to integrate the humanity instead of continue to trump it. And this is why I love what's happening within the spiritual community. We're seeing this shift occur. It's no longer about get out of the humanity so you can get into the divinity. It's let's bring the divinity in so it can integrate the humanity and we become whole as a result of it. And we're no longer in any kind of war with any aspect of ourselves. When we end that war, we will watch that war end in the world.
It makes totally sense and it resonates completely. It's just the work, to do the work. Wow, thank you so much, Teal. This was really wonderful as always, or insightful. And I learned a lot today, and still like it reflects things I've heard before, and it's a great reminder always to just stay on doing the work, actually. So good luck with everything, and I'm excited about your book, and I can really recommend it for you guys to read the book. So take care. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you. Love you.
Thank you. And thank you for watching, guys, and remember to subscribe to my channel if you haven't before. Much light from Norway and the US. Bye bye.